Hi, everybody. Today is Friday, March 28th, 2025, and I have the privilege to have Ambassador Chas Freeman on our podcast. Welcome back, Ambassador.
Glad to be back.
Let's get started, Ambassador, with the letter of Donald Trump he sent to Iran. Iranian today they said that they have responded to Donald Trump, and here is today is a very important date in Iranian calendar. Is the day of Quds as they call it.
Right.
And here is the foreign minister of Iran talking about the current situation.
Is an important landmark day, a glorious day considering the intensity of the people's presence in rallies. I think we have a very understanding people and wise people. They do recognize the situation. It's clear that it's much more crowded and serious things have happened in the region since last Quds Day. It's expected that given the threats and pressure exerted on the Islamic Republic, people have beginning to feel that their presence is important in such rally. It's the biggest power of the Islamic Republic is its power. We are moving ahead with reliance on our people, and this is the manifestation of people's presence in the arena. Besides the support for the Quds and the endeared people of Palestine and supporting the Palestinian cause, they have also manifest their presence, their powerful support, and this gives us compassionate and for us to move ahead in international arenas. Well, today the region is in a sensitive state. There are clashes in various regions, Yemen, Lebanon, and the Islamic Republic is closely monitoring these events, and I have close contacts with foreign ministers of other countries. Diplomacy should be applied to reduce expansion of struggles, and we do understand that the Zionist regime is seeking to spread unrest throughout the region, and this has been seen in various countries in the region. And there have been warnings have been given to. We have given warnings to other countries to be wise of their movements. We are moving ahead with détente to find the diplomatic solutions, and we do understand that they will never be successful in materializing their ambitions.
Ambassador, do you think that diplomacy would prevail, or we're gonna have a devastating, I would say, war between Iran and the United States?
I can't say. I mean, as Foreign Minister Araqchi spoke, the United States is apparently marshaling bombers at Diego Garcia, moving aircraft, refueling aircraft into place for those bombers. So it looks as though we're quite close to some kind of war. And not just a war that Donald Trump has unconstitutionally continued against the Houthi government in Yemen. And of course, the Trump administration is also apparently backing the Israeli violations of the ceasefire in Lebanon, an airstrike on a building in Beirut that belonged to Hezbollah, supposedly in retaliation for a Hezbollah rocket fired at northern Israel. Hezbollah, for its part, has denied that it fired that rocket. And of course, there are many groups in Lebanon, so that's quite a plausible claim that they did not do this. I don't think they want an escalation. I don't think Iraq wants an escalation of fighting in its neighborhood. I don't think Iran wants fighting a battle. And Mr. Araqchi, the foreign minister, was quite clear that Iran would prefer a diplomatic solution to the tensions. He used the word détente, a relaxation of tensions. That has indeed been the program of the Pezeshkian government. So I can't say. On the one hand, it looks as though Iran is ready for dialogue. On the other hand, the U.S. perhaps is not.
And it seems that one of the cases that they have responded in this letter, and it says that Iran reaffirms that it will not negotiate directly with the United States, especially under the policy of maximum pressure. Do you think that there is no understanding between the two governments? That's why we're getting to this, because you have to you have to have some sort of understanding, some sort of mutually beneficial ground to talk about on to agree on. Do you see that coming to the
Well, we were surprised earlier when Bill Burns, later the head of the CIA, at the time he was the Deputy Secretary of State, was able to meet with Zarif and others and have a direct dialogue. That was a surprise. It was clandestine. It was not declared. It was the fact that those dialogues were occurring was not shared with friends in the region. So it's possible there could be a direct dialogue on similar terms, but and it's very important that that happen. I think Mr. Witkoff, although he is an amateur in diplomacy, said it well. He said, if you don't listen to the other side, how can you know what they can and cannot accept? How can you formulate a position if you don't directly understand what the other side's position is? So I hope there will be a direct dialogue, but I don't think it's surprising at all that Iran publicly states that it will not conduct such a dialogue in the face of threats of maximum pressure and military attack.
It seems that Donald Trump, in his letter, wanted to negotiate on the case of Yemen and other regional powers. Here is the response coming from Iran. That they say that Iran doesn't negotiate on behalf of any regional power, that Iran doesn't dictate the foreign policy to other nations. They're specifically talking about Ansarullah and Yemenis. In your opinion, is that if Donald Trump changed his mind and ease somehow the pressures on Iran, is that possible to bring Yemenis in and negotiate with them? Because Iran says they're not gonna put pressure on Yemen.
I don't think the Yemenis would agree to joint negotiations with Iran because the Yemenis are quite independent-minded. And while Iran provides support to Yemen, much as the United States provides support to Israel, the United States does not control Israeli policy, and Iran does not control the policy of Ansarullah, the Houthis. So I think this is an understandable position on the part of Iran. I don't think the United States is in a position to negotiate on behalf of Israel, for that matter. So if there's going to be diplomacy, it's going to have to be direct rather than indirect, if it is to accomplish anything.
And we had Witkoff talking about it in his latest interview. By the way, when you look at the way that he's talking about both the conflict in Ukraine and in the Middle East, you see it's somehow a fresh sort of view on both conflict, but you don't see the foundation, you don't see the background, you don't see any history beyond that. Do you think that he's going to be responsible for the conflict with Iran as well, or they're going to have a much sophisticated team to talk with it, or maybe through Oman to talk with Iran?
Well, I suppose the contacts through Oman would be the preparatory stage for any such dialogue between the United States and Iran. I don't know what the mind of Mr. Trump is with regard to what assignments he will give to Mr. Witkoff. I will say that, as I said, Mr. Witkoff is an experienced negotiator on real estate transactions. He is not an experienced diplomat. He seems to be learning on the job. He's been accused, for example, of repeating the Russian position, Putin's position, as a statement of fact. And this is, people claim that this means he doesn't really understand what's going on. The fact, of course, that what he says coincides with what Mr. Putin says, perhaps, does not mean that he's wrong. Mr. Putin might be right, and Mr. Witkoff too. I think there is, however, emerging a major issue for this Trump administration, and that is the issue of competence on the part of the people who have been assigned various tasks by President Trump. We've seen the little group that was talking about attacking Yemen do so on insecure phones. I have to say that reading that transcript, it sounds to me like as though this wasn't the only instance. They must have had this group going for some time. And I have no reason to doubt that they were using the same method. And I know that Mr. Witkoff was using an insecure telephone while he was in Moscow. This is not, this is really a level of incompetence with national security that is quite alarming. And there's consequences to this. Suppose you are a foreign intelligence service and you have a liaison relationship with the United States through the CIA or some other agency. Are you going to share information now when, it can be disclosed in insecure channels? There are a lot of competent countries out there with in the cyber espionage area. They include Israel, of course. They include Russia. They include China. I don't know about Iran. Probably include Iran also. They include the North Koreans. So this is a more important issue procedurally than it has been reported to be. The final note on this, of course, is that this was a discussion about the blatant violation of international law. They were proposing to kill a civilian and everybody else in a residential structure. They say, well, the missile guy is walking in to see his girlfriend's, residence, and now it's flattened. So this is exactly what the Israelis do: complete indifference to the loss of human life, civilian life, no deference to the laws of war. And it raises a serious question. If Israel and the United States behave like this with regard to other people, will others not do the same to us? What is now to stop, let's say, the Houthis or someone else attacking the missile guy in the US as he walks into his girlfriend's house? So this is all very dangerous, very irresponsible, very unprofessional, and really quite damaging.
It's so amazing to me that J.D. Vance, in this sort of chats, he was mentioning that let's not hurry about the bombing Yemen, but because Europe is much more affected by the way that Yemenis are behaving. We are not that much affected. Does he really not know that the main reason is Israel, or his? How do you find this?
No, I think he does know, but he's basically taking a classic isolationist viewpoint, which is that this doesn't really bother the United States. The only ships getting shot at. First of all, the United States doesn't really have a merchant marine because of legislation passed in the 1920s that put a burden on American shipping that broke the back of the American shipbuilding industry. China in the last year built more ships than the United States did in the previous 80 years. So this is, we don't have a merchant marine to speak of. What we do have is shipping on other countries' bottoms, which goes through the Red Sea to many places, including Israel. And we have, there's a lot of trade between Asia and Europe that goes through the Red Sea. Those countries that have aligned themselves with Israeli genocide in Gaza and with other Israeli policies, the attacks on Lebanon, the attempted expulsion, ethnic cleansing of the West Bank, find their ships under attack by the Houthis. And indeed, today, the Houthis fired more missiles at American warships in the Red Sea. Fortunately for the U.S. Navy, they're not terribly accurate. But Mr. Vance was expressing an opinion that basically the United States should stick to its own affairs and not take on the burden of others. Whether he applies that same principle to Israel or not is an open question. Clearly, he doesn't have any inclination to defend the Europeans in this arena.
Do you feel the feeling that you get from these chats is that the main goal was to intimidate Iran, or how do you feel that way? How do you feel? Did they really try to intimidate Iran by the attacks on Houthis?
Well, I think that was the underlying purpose. Yes, this is a warning shot to Iran, but frankly, there is no strategy here. To have a strategy, you must have feasible objectives. You have to have the resources necessary to achieve those objectives. You have to have a plan. None of these conditions are met. The marshaling of stealth bombers and other aircraft in Diego Garcia and in the region, I think not in Qatar. It's interesting. Apparently, troop airlift aircraft and refueling aircraft left Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, presumably for Diego Garcia or some other location, because Qatar would not want to be involved in an attack on Iran. So this is quite ominous. As I said earlier, I don't think you can rule out the possibility that the United States, once again, will fail to exhaust the diplomatic options before it resorts to force.
How do you see the possibility of using nuclear bombs, nuclear weapons on the part of the Trump administration in Yemen or Iran?
I don't think this is a possibility. I would rule that out. The United States does reserve the right, if that's the right word, to use nuclear weapons against anybody. We are the only country that ever did use them against Japan in 1945. And whereas the Russians have a very clear nuclear doctrine that restricts the circumstances in which they would use nuclear weapons, the Chinese have a no first use policy, and India and Pakistan have fought wars without going to the nuclear level. Theoretically, it's possible the United States could use nuclear weapons, but there's no purpose to that. And it would be regarded by the world as an absolutely unprovoked horror.
Do you think that if things to that extreme that you've mentioned that never happened, the use of nuclear weapons, what would be the reaction on the part of Russia and China? Are they going to back Iran? Are they going to just leave Iran alone to fight? It's fight, it's Iranian fight, it's not ours. How do you evaluate the behavior of Russians and Chinese? Are they going to be similar in the way they would respond, or they're going to be different?
Well, of course, that's up to them, and only they know how they would respond. I assume they are studying this contingency. My expectation would be, in the case of the Russians, that they would accelerate the transfer of technology and weapons to Iran, but would not involve themselves directly. I don't see that they can create a diversion for U.S. forces. In the case of the Chinese, they might respond by launching an attack on Taiwan. This would divert American attention and forces, and it would be an effective response to developments in West Asia. And there is actually a precedent for this. Very few people remember the 1958 crisis in Lebanon, when the United States sent troops to Lebanon. Mao Zedong, in a move which I don't think we understood at the time, but which we now do, responded with increased attacks on the offshore islands held by Chiang Kai-shek in Fujian province. He created a crisis in the so-called offshore islands off China and Quemoy Matsu. And this was intended as a diversion to direct American attention away from Lebanon. As it happened, the Lebanese situation deteriorated, and President Eisenhower was forced to withdraw the troops he had sent to Lebanon. But this is a precedent that the Chinese act sometimes to distract enemies by doing things closer to home that they have the capability to do. China apparently set the objective of having its armed forces ready to use force to reunite Taiwan with the rest of China by 2027. Well, this is 2025. They seem to be achieving their objectives, their goals earlier rather than later. They are very risk averse, but I couldn't rule out a diversion of the sort I mentioned.
Some people argue that Russia would benefit from a conflict in the Middle East if the price of oil goes up. But when you look at Russia today, and there's their sort of a strategic game, their sort of strategic mindset, would that benefit in a long run Russia, or they don't see that?
I don't think they think that way. I think that is typical thinking of the business-dominated capitalist world, which imagines that wars are started by economic calculations or prevented by them. You know, this is like before World War II. England and Germany had never had such a high level of trade, and the British assumed this would mean there would be no war. Well, that's not why wars start. Wars are directed at political objectives, political military objectives, and I think the Russians have enough on their hands in Ukraine rather than getting involved in West Asia. And I don't think they think about maximizing the flow of money from oil to that extent. Perhaps people in the Persian Gulf do, because they are far more dependent on oil. Russia is a very complex economy that sits astride huge natural resources, not just oil. The prospective ceasefire in the Black Sea would permit Russia to resume the export of grain and other commodities, mining products, fertilizer, which is a byproduct of the oil production, through the Black Sea. But of course, the Russians have said that in order for them to be able to do that, the sanctions through the clearinghouse in Belgium, they would have to be lifted. And now we hear from the Europeans they won't lift their sanctions or permit that without the complete defeat of Russia. So this is a reminder to the amateurs who are managing U.S. foreign policy that, you know, in the end, if you want to have peace, everybody with the capacity to wreck it has to be included, and everybody with an interest in the perpetuation of the war has to be somehow paid off or benefited. And the Europeans are not in a mood to do that. They are still looking at military options rather than diplomatic options for dealing with Russia. I think that is a mistake, but it is clearly a mistake they are making.
If if the Trump administration was honest about negotiating with Iran, don't you think that it could have been helpful if they if they have secured the ceasefire between Palestinians and Israelis, and maybe not having right now Israelis bombing Beirut? Because these are huge sort of events that are connected to each other. They're not isolated events. And do you see that the Trump administration understanding this, or they see events as isolated? Ukraine isolated to the Middle East isolated to Iran, is isolated from what's going on in Lebanon or with Palestine?
I don't see any evidence of a combined strategy for the region. The Trump administration, Mr. Trump himself, is notoriously transactional. The approach I see being taken, for example, in peace with Russia and Ukraine, is piecemeal. So we have a ceasefire proposal, which we concoct with the Ukrainians. Then we have another ceasefire proposal, which we draw up with the Russians, and the two don't match. And therefore, there's no ceasefire because Ukraine wants an end to attacks on all infrastructure, ports, railroads, and energy infrastructure. The Russians agreed to suspend attack on energy infrastructure only. And we have, in the case of the Russians, a demand for the end of all attacks on infrastructure on their territory, and including they would reciprocate and the energy infrastructure attacks. But immediately after we have these two incompatible ceasefire proposals on the table, Ukraine proceeds to attack energy infrastructure in Russia. So this is not evidence of professional competence on the part of the American diplomatic team. And it raises a question. What, other than incentives and sweet talk, did Mr. Rubio and Mr. Waltz and Mr. Witkoff offer in the first meeting with the Russians in Riyadh? Now, with regard to Iran, of course, you're correct. If there had been a real ceasefire, not a fake one, in Lebanon, or a real ceasefire, not a pause in the genocide, as there was in Gaza, yes, this would simplify things considerably. But you'd still be left with an approach to Iran that begins with the threat of maximum pressure and an attack. So Iran is asked to negotiate under the point of a gun. And I don't think Iranian pride will allow that, certainly not openly. And perhaps there could be back channel, quiet, off the record discussions somewhere, because that would not embarrass Iran with its own people and cost it credibility with others in the region. But that doesn't seem to be what is happening.
You've mentioned the case of Lebanon, Palestine, and we know that Israel is bombing Beirut. How do you see? We have a new government in Lebanon. Somehow they're trying to make a common ground. Hezbollah is getting along with them. They're trying to communicate well with the government, but you don't see the Israelis, on the other hand, help to facilitate the situation that the United States was interested in. If the Biden administration, in its final days, they were trying to manage something, but they couldn't do it. And here, the Trump administration, do they really care about what's going on in Lebanon, or do they want to make some changes in that region?
Well, there's no evidence they do. They seem to be entirely in collusion with Israel. But I'd say there's an irony here. The Israeli attacks on Lebanon, the Israeli refusal to withdraw from 5 bases that they have established in southern Lebanon, Israeli arrogance, high-handedness, if you will, have succeeded in uniting Lebanese to a degree that is really almost unprecedented. You have the Lebanese government saying we will not establish diplomatic relations with Israel, we will not make concessions, but also saying we want to keep the ceasefire. And that seems to be a unified position. But in Israel, everything is disunited. The people who fled the north of Israel out of fear of Lebanese attack have not gone back. Many of them, in fact, appear to have emigrated from Israel rather than stayed there. You still have all the divisions that we've seen, including a complete disagreement between the professional intelligence services, such that Prime Minister Netanyahu felt obliged to fire the chief of Shin Bet, the domestic intelligence, occupied territory intelligence service. You have the military at odds with the prime minister about what can and cannot be accomplished in Gaza. You have some differences of opinion, not enough to impede ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. You have the settler, the ultra-Orthodox, very apprehensive about claims that they should join the army. You have the hostage families upset. You have multiple businesses which have failed, entrepreneurs who've lost their startups because of the collapse of the economy. And Mr. Netanyahu hangs on and continues the war very largely because without it, he's in jail. Even in the middle of the war, he's often being called in to testify in court against charges of corruption that have been levied against him. So what Israel is doing is popular on one level. Norman Finkelstein, who is a very outspoken and I think very realistic observer of both the Palestinian and Israeli scene, notes that he doesn't give the percentage, but the polls show only about 3% of Israelis are disturbed by the genocide. The rest of them applaud it. The more Palestinians die, the happier they are. He calls them a group of monsters. This is a Jew, not me. And I think the Israeli government is, at a minimum, sociopathic. Perhaps it's better described as psychotic. It has no legitimacy internationally anymore. We used to ask the question, does Israel have the right to exist? Well, I think most of the world now says, no, it has delegitimized itself. It is demonstrating by its lawlessness that it has no right to exist, that the world would be a better place if it didn't. Now, this is extraordinary. And a lot of this has to do with Mr. Netanyahu's very selfish preservation of his own perquisites and his desire to preserve himself in power, regardless of what happens to his country or the tensions his actions produce. Right in the middle of this, he and other extremists have passed legislation to change the way in which judges are appointed, to politicize it. Basically, no longer look at the professional qualifications of judges, look at their ideological commitment to the program that he espoused. He and Ben Gvir and Smotrich and the other extremists espoused. So secular Jews, people who believe in democracy, for Jews anyway, in Palestine, now face the prospect of that democracy expiring. I wonder what the impact of that will be in terms of emigration. Anyway, so we have a case where Lebanon is unifying, Israel is disuniting, and I don't know how this could be possibly to the benefit of Israel.
Everybody remembers that Donald Trump posted a video of Jeffrey Sachs about Netanyahu. But when you look at the situation right now, it seems that Netanyahu personally is receiving much more support from Donald Trump that he received from from Biden and his administration. Do you think that's the case?
Yes. And I think the explanation is sordid, tawdry, and that is that Mr. Trump has been bought by the Zionist lobby. The huge amounts of money that have been given to him by the Zionist lobby and by others, Elon Musk, various donors committed to Israel, means that he dances to their tune. You know, as the saying in English is, who pays the piper calls the tune. So he's financially beholden to these people. He has obligations. He made promises. Not that he keeps promises. He does famous for not keeping promises, which is, of course, another problem in the context of a potential negotiation with Iran. Iran has already seen him repudiate promises that the U.S. government made that were backed by the UN Security Council. You know, he just cast them aside when he withdrew from the JCPOA, the nuclear deal. So, you know, if you're negotiating with someone who doesn't live up to whatever he promises, why do you want to negotiate at all? You know, Iran obviously sees negotiations as an alternative to war, and that's desirable. But I don't know that I've heard anything from Tehran that sounded hopeful about what negotiations could actually produce.
Today earlier, I talked with Colonel Wilkerson together with Larry Johnson. What Colonel Wilkerson was mentioning that Russia wants to be closer to the West, and after all those difficulties that they had before. How do you find the position of Iran today? In their sort of strategy, do they see themselves closer to the West? Do they want to be closer to the West? Does the West let them to be closer to them? How do you see the mindset of Iranian government?
Well, I think Mr. Pezeshkian has been very clear about this. He wants a rapprochement. He wants détente. He wants to be restore a decent relationship with the West. I think the supreme leader agrees with that. On the other hand, I don't think the United States has any intention of allowing that to happen. Why? Because of the Israeli hammerlock on U.S. policy. It would be to the benefit of the United States. It would serve U.S. interests, both with respect to Iran itself and with respect to the region, if we had a relaxation of tensions and cooperation rather than confrontation. But the administration doesn't seem to be contemplating that. Europeans, for their part, don't seem to have any policy at all. They just, with respect to Iran, they just go along for the American ride. They don't put forward any progress. And the same is, I'm sorry to say, true, as we've said before, in the context of Ukraine. They have no peace proposal. They have no positive thoughts. They're fooling around with various preposterous military schemes that they don't have the capability to implement. And by doing so, they are diverting attention and spending effort on military solutions that are fantasy. They need to come to grips with the fact that there needs to be a political solution. The final point here, and that is that I think Mr. Trump actually has laid out as bait for Russia the promise of a broad cooperation and rapprochement. That's what he wants. Why he wants it, he has not explained. It could be as simple as access to Russian resources, the Arctic, Russian mining, rare earths, Russian this, that, and the other. It could be an effort to combine with Russia to smash OPEC in terms of managing global oil supplies. It could be that he wants to bring Russia into alignment with the United States against China, which, it could be all sorts of things. It could be that he envisages a sort of G3, that is, Washington, Moscow, Beijing, running the world. People forget that Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Joseph Stalin and Winston Churchill at the end of World War II had the idea. Roosevelt said he wanted the world to be run by the four great powers, one of which in his mind was China. He said China could run East Asia, the British could run the British Empire, the Americans would run the Western Hemisphere, Russia would run most of Eurasia. So this was his idea. That is the basis on which the Security Council was formed, with permanent members with a veto. And of course, France was admitted to this as a courtesy because it had an empire in Africa and elsewhere. And because Churchill wanted to appease de Gaulle. But so this kind of idea has been around. I think it's a foolish idea, but it is significant that Roosevelt had it. Trump may have it too. I don't know.
You mentioned Europe and the policy of Europe. Recently, 2 days ago, we had a new summit in Paris on the case of Ukraine. And you see summit after summit talking about Ukraine and the situation in Ukraine in the way that is not beneficial to Europe and European countries. On the other hand, as you've mentioned, nothing coming out of Europe in terms of the conflict that we may have a big fight, big war between the United States and Iran, but they're not talking about it. And on the case of Palestine, they're just silent about it.
Well, I think, the way to look at this is this, that with respect to affairs in Europe, the United States has lost its leadership completely. That is to say, European powers used to follow the American lead in NATO. But the United States is now leaning toward an opening to Russia that the Europeans don't support. And they are openly pursuing a different policy. So this is a collapse of American leadership in Europe. But with respect to events outside Europe, they're still following the American lead. They're not doing anything active, but they are passively supportive. And that is the case with Iran. So, if you had, this all goes back to the period in I remember Henry Kissinger remarking of Europe that they had lost their global vision. They had been imperial powers. The Dutch controlled Indonesia. They had an interest in South Africa. The British had an immense empire that spanned the globe. The French had colonies in the Pacific as well as in Africa. So up to World War II, they all had a global vision because they were involved globally. But after the Suez War and the British withdrawal from east of Suez, they didn't have that view anymore. So they thought only about European affairs. And European affairs then were deadlocked by the Cold War. So Kissinger found them very boring. They had nothing to say on the issues that he was dealing with: Vietnam War, Southeast Asia, China, so forth. And they didn't have any kind of intelligent policy toward the Soviet Union. So I would say, really what we've seen is the collapse of their deference to American leadership in Europe, but they continue to defer on policies elsewhere. How long that's going to last, I don't know. Clearly, there are a lot of strains in European societies over the genocide in Gaza. A lot of demonstrations. And with the United States separating itself from Europe, espousing a different set of policies. This has implications for the West Asia as well, because it makes Turkey very much more important to Europe than it has been. And of course, as we are seeing, Turkey is in a state of instability with major demonstrations, arrests, clampdown by the law enforcement authorities, foreigners being deported for saying the wrong things, rather like the United States. And if you think about the relationship between Europe and the United States, you have to, read the European press. There was an article in The Guardian, a British newspaper, independent newspaper, slightly left-leaning, the other day, which advised people, don't travel to the United States. It's too risky. Look what happens if you run afoul of the immigration authorities at the airport. All kinds of people are being deported for nothing other than saying something. The freedom of speech that the United States was famous for is no more. Now universities are being attacked, faculty are being deported, students are being deported, people are being held at the airport and sent home, others are jailed. There's a breakdown of law and order. There is a lot of arbitrary and capricious law enforcement activity. Nobody can figure it out. So this is driving a wedge between Europe and the United States that the Russians are looking at with great pleasure, and the Chinese too. This is an opportunity for China, which has a bad relationship with Europe, mostly because of economic factors, but also because it supported the United States in turning against China. But you now see Europeans reconsidering that. So all of this has a bearing on possible rethinking by Europeans of their policies in West Asia, including toward Iran, because there's no conflict between Iran and Europe. Europe basically turned on Iran out of solidarity with the United States and for no other reason. But if there is no solidarity, how long will that continue?
Do you think that the case of Canada would be the same as the Europe that you mentioned? They're going to get, because it seems that Canada is reevaluating its policy toward the United States. Are they going to get closer to China, in your opinion?
I don't know that, but I do know that the leading candidate to become prime minister has basically declared a divorce with the United States. He said, we have been very close to the United States. We have had a very warm relationship. We've been interdependent, but we can't afford to do this anymore. And we have to do new things. We have to turn elsewhere. We have to diversify our relationships. I wouldn't rule out some improvement in relations with China. Certainly, Canada is now emphasizing ties to Europe to an extent that it did not do before. So the world is in flux. This is the sort of world, as I've said to you before, this is the kind of circumstance in which middle-ranking powers like Turkey, like Iran, like Saudi Arabia, have freedom of maneuver that they didn't have before. Now, Iran has very good relations now with Russia, which is a historical development of importance, since usually Russia and Iran were at loggerheads, contesting control of Central Asia. It has very good relations with China. It does not have very good relations with Europe. They're okay. Europeans have diplomatic relations with Tehran. They have a dialogue with Tehran. They are, what's the next step? If the United States is leaving Europe to its own devices, it may very well reach out to Iran. It hasn't done so yet, to my knowledge.
You've mentioned that the United States under the Trump administration is not running the show in Europe for the case of Ukraine. And Vladimir Putin yesterday said that the main problem on the part of the West in Ukraine comes from the United Kingdom. The main hostility comes from the United Kingdom. Do you see that would be the case for Europe and the policies in Europe?
Well, I think there has been an Anglo-American alliance against Russia. Why the British are so anti-Russian is a bit of a mystery. That is to say, they began to be anti-Russian in the 19th century. They were anti-Soviet, even though communism had a lot of appeal to British intellectuals in the 1930s. And they were a staunch ally of the United States in the Cold War. In many ways, they've been more anti-Russian than the Americans in recent years. If this may well just be because they want to ingratiate themselves with the United States. They have put themselves in a very difficult position. They cast off their relations with Europe. They're no longer in the EU. They're adrift. This greatly reduced their influence internationally. They don't have the voice in the affairs of Europe that they once had. By no longer having that voice, they diminish their utility to other countries that want to influence Europe, including the United States. So they have diminished influence. And they seem to be a bit desperate to cling to the United States. Unfortunately for them, the United States has changed its view of Russia. That is its official view. The American people, I don't think, have changed their view. But Mr. Trump and his administration have. And they now seek a rapprochement with Russia, which the British oppose. So they are part of the separation of Europe from America that I was discussing. Will they continue that? I don't know. I mean, the British Empire once famously the sun never set on it. And I have seen a map with 17 areas of the world that were not invaded by Britain, which is a great distinction. They invaded everything, including Tibet. So they are much diminished. And from the point of view of the British establishment, the best chance to retain global power and influence is to retain the ability to guide the actions of the United States. But they've lost that. They have a problem. I don't know what the answer to that is. The rest of Europe is reaching out to other partners. You have Mercosur signing an agreement with the European Union. Your own country, Brazil, is very much part of that. We don't know what Mr. Millet will do. Nobody knows. But there's the saying I recall in Spanish, but I'll say it in English. God spends his nights picking up the mess the Argentines make during the day. So nobody can tell you what Argentina will do. But other countries in South America are very much looking to Europe and China as alternatives to the United States. So this is a world in flux. It's a world in which America is not making itself great again. It's making itself weak, powerless, not lacking in influence, with no options other than the use of force, which brings us back to the question of will there be a war with Iran, and you can't rule it out. Because Washington doesn't seem to have much capacity to conduct diplomacy these days, but it can make war.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Great pleasure.
Keep up the separate voice. It's important.
Take care.